Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari Yasuranandana Braja Janaranjana Yasuranandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari Jasoranandana Braja Janaranjana Jasoranandana Braja Janaranjana Jasoranandana Braja Janaranjana Jamunatira Vanachari Jamunatira Vanachari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Krishna Sri Radha Madhava ki jai, Sri Radha Giridhari ki jai, Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Jai Jai Shodhara Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Jai Charanaravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Jai Jai Shodhara Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Shri Bhakti Saranta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada ki jai, counteract Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Samveda Bhakti ki jai, Go Premanandi, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories, Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Okay. A little quiet here in the temple room, huh? So this morning, reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 6th canto, 3rd chapter, we'll start with verse 7. So how far we get. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, word for word. Ataha. Atas tvam eko bhutanam seshvaranam adishvaraha shashta danda dharo narinam subha subha vichechanaha atas tvam eko bhutanam Seshvaranam Adishvaraha Sashta Danda Daro Nrinam Shubha Subha Vichechanaha Atastvam Eka Bhutanam Seshvaranam Adishvaraha Sashta Danda Daro Nrinam Shubha Subha Vichechanaha Vivechanaha Atastvam Eka Bhutanam Seshvaranam Adishvaraha Sashta Danda Daro Nrinam Shubha Shubha Vivechanaha. Anyone like to chant? Atastameka Bhutanam Seshvaranam Adishvaraha Sashta Danda Daro Nrinam Shubha Shubha Vivechanaha. Tastvameka Bhutanam Seshvaranam Adishvara Sashtadanda Daro Nrinam Subha Subha Vivechana Atastvameka Bhutanam Seshvaranam Adishvara Sashtadanda Daro Nrinam Shubha Shubha Vivechana Atastvameka Bhutanam Seshvaranam Adishvaraha Sashtadanda Daro Nrinam Shubha Shubha Vivechana Atastvameka Bhutanam Seshvaranam Adishvara Sadanda Naro Nainam Shubha Shubha Vivechana. Anyone else? Okay. Save the best for last. Seshvaranam Adishvara Sashtadanda Doroninam Subhashibha Vivechana Ataha. As such, Tvam, you, Ikaha, one, Bhutanam, of all living beings, Sa Ishwaranam, including all the demigods, Adishwaraha, the Supreme Master, Shashta, the Supreme Ruler, Dandadaraha, the Supreme Administrator of Punishment, Nrinam, of human society, Subha Ashubha Vivechanaha, who discriminates between what is auspicious and inauspicious. Translation. The Supreme Judge must be one, not many. It was our understanding that you are the Supreme Judge and that you have jurisdiction even over the demigods. Our impression was that you are the master of all living entities, the supreme authority who discriminates between the pious and impious activities of all human beings. Text 8. Tasite vihito dando na loke vartate duna. Chaturbir adbhutai siddhar agyate vipalam vita. But now we see that the punishment ordained under your authority is no longer effective, since your order has been transgressed by 4 wonderful and perfect persons. Purport. The Yamadutas had been under the impression that Yamarāja was the only person in charge of administering justice. They were fully confident that no one could counteract his judgments, but now, to their surprise, his order had been violated by the 4 wonderful persons from Siddhaloka. Text 9. Niyamanam tavadeshad asambir yatana grihan yamochayan patikinam chitva pasam prasahyate. We were bringing the most sinful Ajamil toward the hellish planets following your order when those beautiful persons from Siddhaloka forcibly cut the knots of the ropes with which we were arresting him. Purport. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur remarks that the Yamadutas wanted to bring the Vishnudutas before Yamarāja. If Yamarāja could then have punished the Vishnudutas, the Yamadutas would have been satisfied. Let's see here. I think we're going to stop. You may read more, but let's talk a little bit about these verses. Om Gyantimarandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chakshulunminitam Nena Taismai Sri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapidam Nena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svabadandikam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaur Bhakti Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchikapatarubhascha Kripa Sindhu Bevaja Patitanam Bhavanibho Vaishnavibho Namo Namaha. So by your good wishes and hopes and prayers, I'll say a few things. Yeah, pray a lot for me, please. Okay. So, this Dandadhara judge, there's a few things here. There's 2 things. You have the servants and the masters, something like that. I mean, it's brought out here how the Yamadutas are upset because they thought that Yamarāja was the supreme person when it came to administrating justice in this world, and that no one could thwart his authority. And now they've had a rude awakening, and they got pretty upset. But they couldn't do anything because those Vishnudutas look pretty powerful. right? There's 4 of them, and they're glowing effulgence, and they're all those different weapons, and going to size up the situation. I'm sure the Yamadutas don't get many people who can escape their, their ropes, and they look like pretty nasty people to run into in a dark alley at night or something like that, right? You wouldn't want to run into a Yamaduta. You don't say no to the Yamadutas. They say, it's time to go. Okay, you better go. No one argues with them. Maybe that's why they got tapped for the job, right? It's like someone gets a personal bodyguard. You don't usually get someone that looks like, where's Ravi? He left, right? Rasika? You don't get someone who looks like Rasika, a little skinny Bengali, or something like that, Indian, right? You get someone really big and tough looking. Maybe if they have a few scars on their face, they look they've been through a lot or something like that, big that's who you get for a bodyguard, like that. People, these bouncers at bars, right? The big tough guys, like that. No one argues. They just look at you, okay. So Yamadutas are kind of like that. So they've never experienced someone stopping them from doing what they're doing. And it's not that they walk around just beating people up or something like that. They have the authority of Yamarāja behind them. They have, what they were always thinking, a universal authority. And even there was some conversation, right, with the Vishnudutas, and they're explaining that, no, according to, the laws of Dharma, this person is very, very sinful. It was discussed in the chapter, all the different reasons why, as far as they knew, he was supposed to be taken away to hell. I mean, he was right up there, a great candidate to be dragged off to the hellish planet. So, what's going on here? So it wasn't without, you could say, knowledge that they're acting, but still, they were stopped. So they're questioning Yamarāja that, wait a second, we thought, and they're upset. It's brought out here, they're upset because if you have a master or someone you're serving or an employer or whatever, you're thinking that this person has it all together, and you're okay. You're being taken care of, and what they're saying, and then all of a sudden when they are their authority is challenged or even thwarted, you start wondering about your position. Well, wait a second. I thought everything was okay here, but it's not okay. So the relationship between, like you should say, servant and master is coming into question here. Because there was nothing they did wrong, right? They didn't do anything wrong. They didn't do anything wrong at all. That, they woke up in the morning and they opened up their, looked on their cell phones. Okay, who's the first person this morning? Ajamil's name popped up, probably flashing. He's a big one, let's go get him. And they just took off. It's like that, that was the job for that whole roster of all kinds of people to take off to hell, and then something happened. So they're quite confused about it. And, as far as a judge, they're making a very good point here. There's got to be one. Is this where they already discussed? Yeah, there can't be two. There can't be more than one judge because, and Prabhupada brings up the point, just like in this country, if you are found guilty in one court, you can actually appeal to another court, and they may find you innocent. Of course, that's not a complete argument because tentatively the higher court understands the law better. Maybe there was some mistake in a lower court and a higher court. They could understand because they have to speak according to the law of the land. They just can't make it up. Of course, sometimes they do. Like that. Just heard a lecture recently, and the devotee Yamarāja said that he's talking about judgment. And he said there's a saying that a good lawyer knows the law. A great lawyer knows the judge. Right?
A lawyer changes the law.
Right. So, but as far as judging, judges is not. Judges should be well versed. You have to be an attorney. I didn't look it up, but you have to be an attorney for quite some time. It's not that easy to become a judge, and your peers have to approve of that, and so on. And the few judges I have known, not the ones I've stood in front of in court because of being on Sankirtan, but the ones I've known and heard speak, quite learned, quite well spoken, and it's not a light thing. In fact, who was it? Someone said, I think it was Brian Tracy. Someone said that judges will tell you that in most cases they've already decided the outcome of the case within 2 or 3 minutes, but they have to let the lawyers do their thing. They have to let them. But they've been there for so long. They just look at they know. But the attorneys, and you say, God bless his soul. Remember Ragaputra? Ragaputra, he was a devotee here in San Diego, our god brother. He was a trial lawyer downtown. And he had to deal with some quite unsavory persons being a trial lawyer. And he was talking about how, how contaminated he felt sometimes dealing with these people, because you're just trying to get guilty people off as far as you can, right? That's the lawyer does that, and all these different things they do, and they, what's it called, plea bargaining and things like that. You're guilty, you're completely guilty, but the lawyers, well, how about 10 years? Well, how about 5 years and this fine? And how about they just try to wiggle you out as much, as far as possibly can. That's what they do as a trial lawyer and so on. So it's kind of interesting situation going on there, But a good judge knows the law and is supposed to be able to, the punishment has to fit the crime perfectly well. And it hopes that the criminal will learn a good lesson. And also that people will be protected, or maybe there's some remuneration because they've done something, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very, very important that if someone's in a position of judging, they know what they're doing. There's one story in the Skanda Purana in connection with the Satyanarayana Swami Puja, that these two merchants, Sadhu, he's one hero of the story, he's a devotee, but anyways, they were visiting one city to do some business, and simultaneously 2 thieves had broken into the local king's treasury, and they're running through the streets of the city being chased by the palace guards. And when they realized they weren't in as good shape as the palace guards, because it could probably work out every day, they just dropped everything and ran. They dropped everything right in front of Sadhu's tent. He was setting up his tent with his son-in-law right there. And, heard all this noise outside his tent. He came outside, and right in front of his tent was all this gold and jewels and silver and everything. And he was thinking, what's this? Can you imagine if you walked out the front door of the temple? Tomorrow morning, there's this big bag there. It says Bank of America on it. And it's not one of those exploding ones, right? That gets the dye all over you. And you kind of push it a little bit, and then there's paper in there. And you open it up, and it's just all these bills. What would you do? Huh? Buy ginger brews. Okay. That's not the answer I wanted to hear. But the first thing you do is drag it inside real quick, right? And you'd look and see, is this real? Is this real money? I mean, who would leave a big bag full of money in front of the temple? Now, that has been done in the past. But you want to so they were checking, is it real? Is it real? Then the guards came around the corner and saw them. And there they are. There are 2 of them. There were 2 people running. They must be the thieves, and they grabbed them. And back then they didn't have cameras on their helmets, so they just beat the living daylights out of them. And they said, stop, we're innocent. He said, okay. You go tell that to the king. It's his money. So they dragged him back to the palace, and they introduced him to the king. They said, Maharaj, here are the 2 thieves that broke into your treasury. Great introduction. Whatever happened to being innocent until proven guilty? And the king looked at him, and then Sadhu said, wait, Maharaj, I know it doesn't look good, but we're completely innocent. And he just started to explain, who they were. But the king shut him down. The king said, every thief has an excuse. And really, I don't have time for this. Some low lives have broken into my treasury. Just throw them in the dungeon, and I will deal with it later. And he just locked them up. And they were there for days and weeks and months, and the story goes on. But what happened was that eventually Lord Narayan appeared in the king's mind during a dream and said, those two men are completely innocent. Said, you've made a huge mistake. This is the point I'm making. You've made a very big mistake because you're the king, and the king is the supreme judge in the kingdom. And these two gentlemen, they wanted to explain their side of the story, and you wouldn't take one moment to hear it. So what kind of king are you? What kind of judge are you? He told them to wake up immediately, go to the palace, call them, fall at their feet, beg their forgiveness for what you've done, and then send them home with all kinds of gifts and jewels and so on. So he was reprimanded because he was in a position of being the judge, very important position, and he completely neglected it. So it's a very, very weighty position, especially for Yamarāja. I mean, he doesn't just tap your hand a little bit and fine you $50 or $100 or put you in, as they call the slammer, put you in jail for a few nights or a few years. I mean, he put you through the ringer, right? He's got a whole thing going on there in Yamaloka, like that. Now, of course, not where he lives. He has a very beautiful place where he lives. It's a heavenly planet. But what his place of work, where the work is done, is not so nice. So before you send someone off, and it says he's just like the super soul in one of these purports, because Krishna in the heart, he's got to be. Otherwise, how does he know all the things we've done, good and bad? How can he judge? If you don't know, how can you judge? So he knows. And the Yamadutas are aware of this. I mean, he's a very powerful, by the arrangement of super soul, he knows everything. And he has his secretaries. What was it? Chitragupta? Like he was the one who just tore out his hair trying to keep count of Jagai and Madai. Right? He just, I can't handle this. It's like these guys are doing so much. They used up all the database and papers in the office trying to write down all the sins they performed. And they couldn't believe that they were delivered. That's even more amazing than the story of Ajamil. But, it's a very, he's very, very qualified. They knew that. He's very, very qualified, so they can't understand. And there's got to be one judge. It can't be many. And as far as we know, you were the one. And then all of a sudden, these beautiful, perfect personalities have come and, transgressed your order. So this conversation is going to go on back and forth. And a few verses from now, Yamarāja becomes ecstatic. Ecstasy. Because his Yamadutas mention the holy names of the Lord. And he doesn't really hear that in hell very often. Like that. You think maybe you would? All those people suffering? Hare Krishna! Of course, if you can say Hare Krishna, you probably wouldn't be there, right? But imagine people would. Anyways. So one has to be satisfied with one's authority. I guess we could say that. The Yamadutas were not satisfied. They're pretty upset, and really they wanted an explanation. They're embarrassed. Imagine how embarrassed they were, and they wanted to do their service as their false egos were hurt. And so they wanted some answers, because it's important that, of course, if you're a servant, you're serving very nicely, but if you're in a position of authority, you're doing that job also appropriately. And this is what the question is being brought up here about Yamarāja. Is he actually qualified? They're actually criticizing him on a certain level. It's described here. They're criticizing him, like, what's going on here? A little upset. like that. Of course, I wouldn't want to upset Yamaraj. Be a little careful what you say and how you say it. But I mean, he could understand what they went through because it was completely out of the, what do they say? You know, out from left field. This never happens. Usually there's a sinful people, you come and get them, they freak out, you wrap the ropes around their neck and drag their subtle body out of their gross body and off to hell. Actually, to see Yamaraj, they bring him to Yamaraj first, and Yamaraj, you know, looks at him and says, "Welcome, welcome." Yeah, he said, "Chittagupta, what's on the docket today?" And they're standing there, and you can imagine. I think there's one picture, another canto. You know, all these people like in subtle bodies in Yamaraja's court. They don't look happy at all. It's kind of like I heard this in one lecture years ago by one gentleman. He said that up until, you know, during the communist rule of Russia, there was never a in the courts in Russia there was never a finding of anyone innocent. You went to court in Russia. How do you say how do you say you know, goodbye in Russian? No, Siberia ticket. Just give them the Siberian ticket and get them out of here. That was it. So it's interesting. But you know, Yamaraj has to, and it's all very, very efficient. Just like today, something happens, you may wait weeks and months to go to court, and sometimes years, depending on the lawsuit or this or that. Everyone's delaying, and there's no, you know, there's no room. There's just so many, so many problems, or I don't know, crimes or whatever you want to call it, or situations where there's not enough judges to take care of it. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was glorified. They couldn't. Amazing. He would go through. You know, he was a magistrate there in Puri, and he would see so many different, you know, hear so many different cases within such little time and make excellent decisions. It wasn't like he was just blah, blah, blah. You know, and the British people in the court were amazed that he was just so expert at just getting through all of these. And he had time to go home, have lunch, and then come back, and then finish up his day early, and then go write books about Krishna and so on. They were just amazed. But he was very expert in all of his judgments and everything. So he was a very, very good judge. So I guess whatever our position of authority is, one lesson from this is we have to make sure we do it very nicely. Because there's nothing worse than being in a position of authority and no one cares for your authority. Is that right?
Sounds bad.
It sounds bad, right? Tell everyone go left and they all go right. Well, what's that all about, right? So, you know, the word authority means? I told this many, many years ago. I heard in a class, I think, right in this temple room, what the word authority means. It means one who helps you expand, you know, grow and expand. That's what your authority is supposed to help you do. So, whatever the position is, one has to earn that, you know, authority and respect. And but it's if one doesn't have it, it's a very, very difficult situation for everyone involved. So this is why the Yamadutas are very much concerned, because Yamaraj is qualified. He's been empowered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So did he miss something? That's the point. And of course, he didn't miss anything, and he gets a chance here to explain everything very nicely to his servants, the Yamadutas, about the glories of chanting the holy name and the glories of the Vaishnavas. So let me just read one more verse and we'll talk for a little while. This is number 10, because it connects to this, and then we'll stop because it goes into a different theme, a different direction. So 10 is Tamste viditum ichchamo yadino manyase kshamam narayaniti abhite ma bhar it yayayur drutam. As soon as the sinful Ajamil uttered the name Narayan, this is what made Yamaraj ecstatic. He just heard the name Narayan. His servant said, Narayan. These 4 beautiful men immediately arrived and reassured him, saying, do not fear, do not fear. We wish to know about them from your lordship. If you think we are able to understand them, kindly describe who they are. Purport. The order carriers of Yamarāja, being very much aggrieved because of their defeat by the 4 Vishnudutas, wanted to bring them before Yamarāja and, if possible, punish them. Otherwise, they desired to commit suicide. Before pursuing either course, however, they wanted to know about the Vishnudutas from Yamarāja, who is also omniscient. So that omniscience is a gift of the Supersoul. He's omniscient as far as the activities of the jivas in this material world, and it's a thankless task he has. You know, whenever I meet a policeman, you know, which isn't very often, I assure you, but whenever I always ask them, you know, why are you doing that job? Because all day long they simply look for trouble. You know, they're dealing with trouble. Or like a fireman. You know, firemen are paid to run into fires while everyone's running out. You ever wonder about that? It's pretty amazing, you know. All these people, or any of these first responders, you know. Most people going the other direction, they're going in. It's, you know, or especially like policemen and people like that. They're difficult situations, they go in to deal with it. It's pretty amazing. So, you know, there's one class of Prabhupada, I think this is the verse, where the devotee recited and read the translation, says, do not fear, do not fear. And Prabhupada said, oh yes, and he goes, yeah. Prabhupada said, twice?
Yeah, because they're reading from the manuscript, but that can actually be followed.
Yeah, yeah. Prabhupada said, twice? 3 times? Right, like that. So, I'm going to end here, because if there's any discussion or questions about what's being covered so far.
I have a question.
The thing that is puzzling about this is that, what does this indicate? That Yamaraj never told him about this. It seems to indicate that it really, really rarely happens. It hadn't happened before. That people, you know, that someone who's chanting is usually not so sinful, you know, and so that this hadn't come up apparently before, because you would think, you know, that well, okay, I better tell them about this clause about, you know, the holy name, that if someone's chanting, then all his sinful reactions are eradicated just by that one chanting at the end there.
Something should have been posted in the employee room,
Yeah.
in the break room, right? They always have those announcements from the OSHA regulations, this and that. So something should have posted there for the. It's rare.
It gives him a chance now to explain it, and we can listen in and get all the glories at home.
Anything else? Yes, Maitreya?
Hare Krishna, thank you. You made some really excellent points about the qualifications for a judge and for a person, what to speak of being in the position of Yamaraj. I have a son who's just turned 16, and he's a devotee and is convinced of the sublime nature of the Vedic culture and Vedic kings, and especially after the last election cycle, as we look at our situation. I told him, Srila Prabhupada said that democracy can work if a Krishna-conscious person runs and becomes elected, but we haven't seen too many of those. So I'm just wondering, you know, based on some of the points you made about the qualifications for leadership, what can we say to young people so they don't lose complete, you know, what's the position we should teach in instructing them about modern politics?
What should we teach our young people never. What's our stance on modern politics?
Yeah, I mean, occasionally someone like, our friend Balamantra Prabhu will run on a devotee platform, but those folks are rare. In the meantime, do we just tell them don't bother voting, just keep chanting and wait see if someone Krishna conscious comes along?
Well, Prabhupada said he'd never voted. So I think it's an individual thing, because there may be certain things you may want to vote on, But as far as the caliber of people, just by the very nature of this Kali Yuga, or the time we're in, where are you going to find anyone qualified? And the point is that if we vote for someone, and whatever they do, we are assisting them. We take a little piece of that karma, I guess. So it's, it's not unique also. Can you imagine Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? That time, the government was, the invaders were there. They had been there for a few hundred years already, tyrants, doing all kinds of horrible things. But in the midst of all that, the Vaishnavas were practicing their Krishna consciousness and their, devotional service as best they could. And just because there's not much that you can do about it. There's really not much you can do about it, except education. Right? And that's Prabhupada's books and Prabhupada's teaching. So the very best thing we can do for the political situation, for the environmental situation, for any economic situation, is the preaching of Krishna consciousness, because that's the only thing will actually turn things around. That's what can actually help people. That's very, very important. Madison, I think he was the president at one time. Was it James Madison was his name? It's called the Federalist Papers. I remember hearing this quote once about democracy and so on. He said, democracy will only work if the citizens are well-educated and religious. So if we want to make democracy...
What I'm saying is people aren't so well-educated
or religious, so now we know why we got problems. But by distribution of Krishna consciousness, people become religious and they become very well-educated. So the best thing we can do for the political scene is distributing transcendental knowledge, these books, and then people will change. And then they can change things, but under the circumstances, what's going to happen? What's going to happen.
Just a 10-second note. This last election, I got the department over there, and they were sending out the ballots. You can send in by mail, And there were so many Republicans, so many Democrats. He says, "Well, I know there's Republicans. There's no way I want them to get in, so I'm going to vote for the Democrats." I said, "Wait a minute. The Democrats are all for the abortion." And I just threw the thing away, because you vote and you're implicated in what they do. So we don't, there's also a thing with taxes, I remember that way back before I even knew about it. That was Thoreau's thing, this nonviolence, don't get involved because you pay the taxes and you're implicated in what the taxes are used for. So that's,
Weapons.
Yes, mostly weapons. $800 billion a year.
800 billion.
Yes, it keeps growing every year. That's how much America spends on the so-called Defense Department.
Microphone? Is there another microphone over here? You wanted to say something? Okay. Well, Maitreya, was that kind of a sad answer?
Thank you. I'm very satisfied. A few generations ago in Russia, in literature and plays, if you really wanted to insult somebody, the worst thing you could do would be to call them a politician. And the Vedic culture is specifically meant to avoid that. There's a royal family, there's Brahmins, and there's no vying for power. That's done. So someone is raised from the time they're born to take care of the citizens. It's a sublime system. And my son said, yeah, unless you get a bad apple. I said, yeah, in that system you may get a bad apple now and then. In our current system, it's like nothing but bad apples. Hare Krishna, thank you.
Yeah. Well done, Das.
So yeah, this idea of, in America, you have freedom of speech, right? Which, a lot of people now are saying is being threatened, freedom of speech. And freedom of religion. But comparatively speaking, even now, even though, some people may say, okay, it's being threatened, freedom of religion or freedom of speech or something like that. But in America, it's amazing, actually, how much freedom of religion and freedom of speech we have. Other countries, for example, like in Turkey, if you talk about the president of Turkey in a negative way, like any news station says anything about him, that's it. They're going to jail, they're disappearing. So nobody says anything. Or you're just like blacklisted, you can't get a job anywhere or something like that. In America, everybody's talking about the president, And what to speak of, like, just the freedom of distributing Prabhupada's books. In Turkey, for example, it's a Muslim country, so it's dangerous, so devotees don't do it. And there's also fear that, the government can do something if they want, So the freedom of religion that devotees have to distribute books, they could go practically anywhere all throughout America, and distribute books. It's quite amazing. And, devotees should take advantage of that. Like the devotees in Turkey recently, they set up a book. There was a book fair. I participated a little bit in the book fair there recently, but it was amazing. They said over 500,000 people attend this book fair. It's huge, like just a bunch of vendors selling all different types of books. So devotees, somehow they got in there and they were distributing Prabhupada's books in Turkish. So they have about 7 books now. But it was a big thing for them, that like in America, it's like, oh, so what? You're at a book fair, who cares? Not who cares, but there might be less of a appreciation for it. Where devotees is a huge thing. It was an 8-day book fair, and so anyways, I'm just saying that as a side note, if we're living in America, we should try to take advantage of certain things that are allowed, like distributing books. So while we're still allowed, exactly. Hare Krishna.
Okay, so we can end here. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.